What did Cormac McCarthy think of modern art? And today we are going to hear McCarthy talk at length at the apocalyptic problems of modern art and then the solutions to the crisis we are currently facing. And this is interesting because it's not just McCarthy. A lot of my favorite authors have been blowing the whistle on this stuff for decades now, but artists and writers like you and I who think we are the exception to the rule have only continued the problem. And if you guys don't already know, Right Conscious is the headquarters of everything related to Cormac McCarthy here on YouTube. In the playlist down below, you will find over 180 free videos on McCarthy, and that list is growing every single week. And so if you guys want more, or if you want to learn about Cormac McCarthy's favorite authors and books, and I've compiled over 400 of them, the biggest resource anywhere online, I should say the most comprehensive resource online. That is also down in the description below. But enough for me. Let us now hear from McCarthy. Well, I don't know what of our culture is going to survive, or if we survive. If you look at the Greek plays, they are really good, and there's just a handful of them. Well, how good would they be if there were 2,500 of them? But that's the future looking back at us. Anything you can think of, there's going to be millions of them. Just the sheer number of things will devalue them. I don't care whether it's art, literature, poetry, or drama, whatever. The sheer volume of it will wash it out. I mean, if you had thousands of Greek plays to read, would they be that good? I don't think so. This is just entry level to what's coming. Just the appalling volume of artifacts will erase all meaning that they could ever possibly have. But we probably won't get that far anyway. All right, we are already this far. And what's interesting about McCarthy's philosophy here of the simulacra is that if you look at McCarthy's three protagonists, Anton Chigurh, Judge Holden, and Alicia Western, they are all suffering from hyperrationality. They are all trying to make the world a simulacra, obviously in various ways. Judge Holden is trying to account the world and through his ledger and wants to put all the world in his zoo. Chigurh has reduced his life to such a sharp rationality that he judges life versus death by a coin flip, by the classic example of equal probability. And Alicia was trying to understand the world through math and science at a very deep level and failed, or maybe succeeded, but that really didn't nourish her soul. And if you guys don't know what a simulacra is, it is a copy of a copy. That's what you're watching right now. But if you interpret this and then maybe let it influence your life, and then go out and do something, then suddenly there's this chain of simulacras, and a person at the end of it will never know its origin. And the origin point of all simulacra always goes back to nature eventually, because that is really that and objective reality is the only real thing that's origins can be traced. I mean, even this house and these things around me, I don't know their origin. Anyway, but Baudrillard theorized that when there were too many simulacra in the world and too much information, we would eventually enter a hyper-reality, which he defines as the generation by models of a real without origin or reality. And so out here in this desert, this wasteland without reference, we are looking for things to tie us together, to ground us. And if you go back to the 1950s, even the 1940s. In America, there were only a dozen or so poetry books released every single year. And if you were in the poetry world, that was a big deal because you would see in 1946, like, oh shit, Robert Lowell just released Lord Weary's Castle. And everybody, all the major people would make a comment on it in a literary magazine. Everyone would be talking about it. Everyone would read it. And it's not like there were less people back then reading poetry. And I'm sure per capita, there were way more because a lot of people read poetry now, but it's really just like Rupi Kaur or just very simple stuff. And so that method obviously didn't just elevate those authors and give them a more successful career because there were less of them, but it elevated other people and it created a connectivity between us. And this is why a lot of booktubers quit and fail in general, because I could sit here and make a book haul video or what I read in July video, but you maybe won't know one of the books I'm talking about. We will have nothing to connect with. You'll have nothing to connect with in the video. And that's why BookTube inherently self-destructs all the time and is very narcissistic in a weird way, because most likely you care about Cormac McCarthy. That's why I put his face in the thumbnail and his name in the title. And if you guys want to explore Cormac McCarthy deeper, I run a Cormac McCarthy book club, a Cormac McCarthy course over on the Right Conscious Substack. And over there, I also post daily podcasts where I dive into stuff that I can't talk about here on YouTube. I have all my writing over there and a bunch of other cool stuff. Plus, there's some free stuff over there for some of you guys who are interested. So if you guys would like access to that or my free writing school where I teach you guys how to build an audience and become a better writer, all the links are down in the description below, and I would love to see you guys over there. And I'd have to have a delusion of grandeur to think that you guys care about the books I bought this past weekend. And so this wasn't just true in poetry. This was true in music and all different forms of art. And eventually in the late 1950s and early 1960s, because of the rise of MFA programs and National Endowment of the Arts programs, and kind of a change in consciousness where people wanted to become artists, they didn't want to work a job anymore, kind of the American dream started to slip away, especially with some of the economic problems in the United States in kind of the early 1970s. Then suddenly we were creating all these artists who had inflated opportunities to put their art out into the world. I know plenty of people in MFA programs that have their tuition waived. They get paid $20,000 a year to teach 2 classes. And then they have other fellowships, but they've never published a word of writing in any magazine in their life. They've just submitted their writing to these awards or to these programs, and they're getting paid more than the average author gets for spending 8,000 hours on a book and maybe selling a couple thousand copies. Instead of kicking their ass to the curb and saying, hey, you need to learn to make people care. You need to actually get good and beat out the other people in the market, which would service art in a much better way. We have tens of thousands, if not more, artists, writers, whoever, who are being supported by the state, by universities, by fellowships, by their parents, by whoever, by crazy jobs or payouts they've got in crypto or the tech world or whatever. And the market's been flooded. And that's just the start of it, because obviously any random person can write a book and throw it on Kindle. It's not that hard. I've done National Novel Writing Month multiple times. I used to do it with my students every single year. And there are people who finish their first draft of 50,000 words in a month and publish it on Kindle or Amazon. No revision. There are over 4 million books published every single year. And for someone like McCarthy, this must be a joke. He's starved. He lost 2 marriages. He was estranged from his son, Colin, because he decided to walk the path as an artist. Imagine writing Blood Meridian and getting less than $5,000 for it. And that is the core, as I just kind of talked about in my How to Create a Literary Renaissance video, of why this problem continues to be a problem, that most people do not spend over 5,000 hours on their book, and it should be closer to 10,000 hours. And then they ask people to read their book. They flood the market. They want to be taken seriously because everyone thinks that if you don't have a book, you're not serious. And to write a book that takes 10,000 hours, especially a novel, is a lot of work. They most likely didn't pay $5,000 to $10,000 for an editor if they're self-publishing. They most likely didn't pay $1,000 for a book cover, another couple thousand for a copy editor. They didn't have someone look at their formatting and choose the font, choose the paperweight, all these different things that if you were trying to be taken seriously, if you were trying to do the best job you could, you do. Back in Greece, or even 150 years ago, if some raving person wrote a book, everyone would laugh it off. And like Cormac said, the Greek plays are really good because there's a handful of them, maybe just because those are the ones that have been handed down, but there are only going to be a couple of performances a year. There's only so much room for the artist. And would we be better off if instead we were supporting tens of thousands of authors with all the genre fiction and all that? We supported 100 authors that wrote for the people. I don't know, but it's a good thought exercise, because what if all of us were reading the same stuff? What if I came on here and we were discussing the new philosophical points that the big philosopher of our time, the Friedrich Nietzsche or whoever, was talking about? Now we have an endless amount of people with PhDs in philosophy, writing secondary literature, going over the most minute things. And they are all really smart. But can that talented person, can the top dog break free anymore? Especially with nepotism, social hierarchies, DEI, like everything else. And we have to think bigger than ourselves, because I know one of the viewers of this program, I've talked to him before, he wrote a book because he wanted to. And he put it out there and just kind of got it out there. And then he started telling people he had written a book. And then people were like, oh my God, you're a writer. you're a genius. And they didn't read his book, but what he said is that he started getting laid more. He started kind of gaining the social status. So he just started releasing more books to appear as this author. He told me he's only sold like 20 books on Kindle in his entire career, but most people have never activated as artists. They've done nothing. And so you do get personal status by doing something like this, that is writing a book. And that's why it's turned into a gimmick, because in 1950, if you were going to write a book, first of all, it'd be super expensive just to get one published. And you'd be competing with the best authors. You'd have to compete with Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor and Cormac McCarthy and everybody else. So you'd probably be like, you know what? I'm not going to do this. Maybe I'll focus on something that I'm good at. And the other odd thing is the blending of our cultures, So if we go back to the 1940s to the 1950s, there was a unity in American consciousness, even with groups that are now kind of branched off. We did have a core philosophy of America that obviously we destroyed ourselves. And that slowly devolved into identity politics and us getting separated from each other. But now it's even worse because we've been separated at a minute level. Now we all become so polarized that certain works of art that should be able to transcend all boundaries and all lines, like the classics, the best of all time, now can't penetrate certain minds. Obviously, Red Dye 40, everyone being dopamine addicts, swiping on the phone all day doesn't help either. But people have become so hardened, whether it's by politics, whether it's by social programming, abuse, trauma in their life, or they're just dumb, that they're impenetrable. And the only thing that can work for them is niche art. The only thing that can work is their favorite Twitch streamer or their favorite Instagram creator or whatever. And so obviously this is good and bad. And like most things in reality, it's our only way out. The aggregist or the Luddite approach of we're just going to abandon this is nice. And I wish we could all do that. But we've now been forced into the game where the only way out, the only way for us to win, and by us, I mean conscious artists, people who actually care about art, who know that art can transform the world and think it's important, and knowledge in general, people who are trying to reduce unnecessary suffering. Well, that means that we have to now dominate every single sub-niche in every single form of art, even outside of writing. Abstract art needs to be led by a thought leader that doesn't have their head up their ass, who is trying to create and innovate and bring people together, and not in a political way, because that's what it always turns into, not in some crazy Marxist way or Republican conservative way. I'm talking like actual unity, actual transformation. There's probably thousands of subgenres, and if we multiply that by all the different types of art, we're looking at 150,000 people, and that's liberating, and that is what is cool about all this, is that we now have knowledge in places like this channel that maybe teach you guys how to become a better writer, that give you guys shortcuts. You guys have access. We all have access to technology and a lot of stuff, good health that people didn't have before. So it's actually not improbable that if we got everyone on the same game plan, that we could get, 100,000 people to a level of being great, maybe not the GOAT, but being great and being able to dominate their little small sector of art. Because right now, the leaders in those, because the hierarchy naturally happens. There are leaders in all those zones, even if they don't realize it. And most of the time, they're not very good. And if they are good, they don't really care about people. They're very selfish about that role that they're playing. And we have the internet to share it. We have the internet to reach these people. Your next door neighbor, your local club isn't going to have your sub niche in it, but now we have the medium and we can waste it. We can let AI come in and wash us away and not accomplish this goal. But it's our fault if we don't. It's your fault if you don't. Because as I just said in my literary renaissance video, if you're not the person to reach the top, then you could be the infrastructure to elevate other people or get the message out. So I do think Cormac McCarthy's right, but I don't think he understood that in every problem there is a solution, and it's usually just the inverse of the problem. And so thank you guys for being here. Let me know your thoughts, and I will see you guys in the next video. And you should go maybe watch my how to create a literary renaissance video if you guys want to have the game plan.